Tom Bradley woke up that Saturday morning feeling pretty good about himself. After spending the last 3 weekends sorting through his garage and spare bedroom, he'd finally managed to organize everything for the big sale. 10 years of living in the same house meant he'd collected way too much stuff. Old textbooks from college, a coffee maker he never used, some furniture that didn't match his style anymore, and boxes of things he honestly couldn't remember buying. He'd put up signs around the neighborhood the day before, bright yellow posters that said garage sale Saturday 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. with his address. Nothing fancy, just simple and clear. His neighbor across the street, an elderly woman named Betty, had even stopped by while he was putting up the sign on the corner to say she'd definitely come check it out. By 7:30, Tom had dragged everything out to his driveway. He'd borrowed some folding tables from his buddy at work and set them up in neat rows. Books on one table, kitchen stuff on another, electronics and gadgets on a third. The furniture, a decent-looking armchair and a small bookshelf, he positioned near the garage door. He'd priced everything reasonably because, honestly, he just wanted it gone. A fresh start, clean garage. That was the goal. The neighborhood, Oakdale Heights, was one of those planned communities with neat lawns and houses that all looked just different enough to feel individual but similar enough to feel cohesive. Tom had moved here a decade ago when he'd gotten serious about his career. It was quiet, safe, and close enough to the city for his work commute, which could be unpredictable. 8 o'clock came around, and right on time, people started showing up. Betty was his first customer, bless her heart. She'd bought a set of mixing bowls for $2 and told him she was just happy to see young people in the neighborhood who weren't glued to their phones all day. Tom smiled and thanked her, though he was definitely guilty of being on his phone plenty. More people trickled in. A young couple looking for furniture for their first apartment got excited about the armchair. Tom watched them test it out, sitting in it, bouncing a little to check the springs. They debated back and forth about whether it would fit in their living room before deciding to take it for $30. He even helped them load it into their truck. A mom with 2 kids in tow bought most of his old textbooks, saying her teenagers needed them for school. Some guy who looked like he fixed things for a living bought all his random tools and spare parts without even haggling. Tom was honestly having a good time. There was something satisfying about watching his old stuff find new homes where people would actually use them. Around 10 o'clock, he'd made about $200 and his driveway was starting to look a lot emptier. He was chatting with a teenager who was interested in his old gaming console when he noticed her walking up the driveway. Linda Hartwell. Tom knew her. Everyone in Oakdale Heights knew her. She was the HOA president and took the job more seriously than most people took their actual careers. She was maybe in her late 50s, always dressed like she was about to attend an important business meeting even on weekends. Today she wore pressed khaki pants and a polo shirt with the Oakdale Heights HOA logo embroidered on it. She carried a tablet and had her reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Tom had dealt with Linda before, though not often. She'd once left a notice on his door because his grass was a 1/4 inch taller than the HOA guidelines allowed. Another time, she'd reminded him that holiday decorations needed to be taken down within 48 hours after the holiday ended. He'd had his Christmas wreath up until January 3rd, which apparently was unacceptable. "Good morning, Linda," Tom said, keeping his voice friendly. The teenager handed him $15 for the console and quickly left, probably sensing the tension. Linda didn't return the greeting. She was already looking around his driveway with that expression she always had, like she'd just smelled something unpleasant. "Tom, are you aware that you're currently in violation of community bylaws?" Tom blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" She tapped on her tablet, pulling up something official-looking. Bylaw 47-B, Section 3. Any resident wishing to conduct a garage sale, yard sale, or similar event on their property must submit a written request to the HOA board no less than 14 days prior to the event. The board then has 7 business days to review and approve or deny the request. He stared at her. "You're kidding me. It's just a garage sale. The rules exist for a reason," Linda said, her voice taking on that lecturing tone she loved to use. "We have standards in this community. We can't have people just setting up sales whenever they feel like it. It creates traffic, brings in strangers from outside the neighborhood, and frankly, it looks unprofessional." Tom glanced around. There were maybe 5 people browsing his tables at that moment. Hardly what he'd call chaotic traffic. "Linda, I've seen other people have garage sales in this neighborhood. I didn't know about any 2-week notice rule. Well, now you do. She started taking photos with her tablet, snapping pictures of his tables, his signs, the few customers who were now looking uncomfortable and starting to drift away. I'm documenting this violation for the record. Come on, is that really necessary? Tom tried to keep his cool, but he could feel his frustration building. He worked hard, paid his HOA fees on time, kept his property looking nice. This felt excessive even for Linda. I don't make the rules, Tom, I simply enforce them. She took a few more photos, including one of him standing there in his old jeans and faded college t-shirt. You'll be receiving an official violation notice. The standard fine for this infraction is $500. $500 for a garage sale? Plus an additional $100 per day if you continue to operate without approval. She lowered her tablet and looked at him with what might have been satisfaction. I suggest you close this down immediately and submit the proper paperwork if you wish to reschedule. Betty, who had come back to browse some more, shook her head from where she stood by the book table. Oh, Linda, don't you think that's a bit harsh? It's just a little sale. Linda turned to her. Betty, the bylaws apply to everyone equally. If we let one person break the rules, soon everyone will think they can do whatever they want. That's how neighborhoods deteriorate. Tom took a deep breath. Getting angry wouldn't help anything. All right, Linda, you've made your point. I'll deal with the violation notice when it comes. She seemed almost disappointed that he wasn't arguing more. Good. I expect you'll shut this down within the hour. With that, she turned and walked back down his driveway, her sensible shoes clicking against the concrete. Tom watched her go, noticing how a couple of his neighbors had come out to watch the interaction from their yards. One of them, a guy named Rick who lived 2 houses down, gave him a sympathetic wave. The rest of the morning felt deflated. Some people still came by and Tom continued selling things, but the fun had gone out of it. He kept thinking about that $500 fine. That was real money, not something he could just brush off. And for what? Trying to clean out his garage? By noon, he started packing up the remaining items. He'd made about $350 total, which meant with Linda's fine, he'd actually be in the whole $150 for the privilege of having a garage sale in his own driveway. As he folded up the last table, Betty came over one more time. Don't let her get to you, dear, she said quietly. Linda's been on a real power trip lately. Last month, she reported the Johnsons for painting their shutters the wrong shade of gray. Can you imagine? Tom managed a weak smile. Thanks, Betty, I appreciate it. What he didn't tell Betty or any of his neighbors was that this wasn't just annoying. It was the principle of the thing. He'd spent 10 years being a model resident, minding his own business, following the rules he knew about. And now he was being treated like some kind of criminal over a garage sale. As he wheeled the last table back into his garage, Tom made a decision. He'd pay the fine, avoid the argument, and move on. It wasn't worth the hassle. But something about Linda's smug attitude stuck with him. The way she'd taken those photos like she was building a case against him. He had no idea that this was just the beginning. Monday morning arrived like it always did, too early and too bright. Tom grabbed his coffee and headed out to check the mail before getting ready for work. That's when he saw it. A crisp white envelope with the Oakdale Heights HOA return address, tucked between a credit card offer and a grocery store flyer. He knew what it was before he even opened it. The official violation notice. Tom stood there by his mailbox in his pajama pants and robe, reading through the formal language that basically said he owed $500 for having the audacity to sell his own stuff in his own driveway. Linda had attached a full report, complete with timestamps on her photos and a detailed description of the unauthorized commercial activity on his property. Commercial activity. He'd made $350 selling old coffee makers and textbooks. Unbelievable, he muttered, folding the notice and heading back inside. What really got under his skin was how thorough she'd been. The report listed every single item she'd photographed, the approximate number of people who'd attended, even the make and model of cars that had parked on the street nearby. It was like, she'd treated his garage sale like some kind of criminal investigation. At the mailbox next to his, Betty was collecting her own mail. She saw his face and just shook her head. She got you already, huh? That was fast, Tom said, holding up the envelope. It's only been 2 days. Betty walked over, her purple cardigan wrapped tight against the morning chill. Linda doesn't waste time when she thinks she's caught someone breaking rules. Last year, she had a violation. Notice on the Pattersons' door within 24 hours because their Halloween decorations were still up on November 2nd. That's insane. That's Linda. Betty lowered her voice even though they were the only ones outside. Between you and me, half the neighborhood is getting tired of her nonsense. But nobody wants to deal with the drama of confronting her. She's got too much time on her hands and takes everything so personally. Tom appreciated Betty's sympathy, but he had to get ready for work. He thanked her and went back inside, tossing the notice on his kitchen counter. He'd deal with it later. Right now, he had more important things to worry about. His job kept him busy, really busy. The kind of busy where sometimes he'd leave for work before dawn and come back after dark. Other times he'd be gone for days, even weeks, traveling to different cities. His neighbors probably thought he had a weird schedule, and he knew some of them were curious about what exactly he did. But Tom had learned a long time ago to keep his work life private. It was safer that way, and honestly, it let him have some peace when he came home. The thing was, Tom worked in a field where privacy mattered. He'd dealt with some difficult people over the years, people who'd made threats, people who held grudges. Keeping his personal life separate from his professional one wasn't just a preference, it was necessary. So when neighbors asked what he did, he'd give vague answers. Work for the government or legal stuff, and then change the subject. Over the next few days, Tom noticed something. Linda was paying attention to him in a way she hadn't before. When he left for work early one morning in his suit, he saw her curtains move. When he got home late that evening, still in work clothes, her porch light was on and he could swear he saw her standing by her window. It was creepy, honestly. The neighborhood had a group chat, one of those things where people shared updates about community events or warned each other about package thieves. Wednesday afternoon, while Tom was at the office reviewing files, his phone buzzed with notifications from the chat. He glanced at it during a break. Someone had posted, "Anyone else think the HOA is getting out of hand lately?" The responses came flooding in. Apparently, Linda had been on a rampage. She'd cited 3 different houses in the past month for minor violations. One family got fined because their kid's bicycle was visible from the street, parked on their front lawn. Another got written up because they'd planted flowers in their yard that weren't on the approved landscaping list. It was getting ridiculous. Betty chimed in with a message. Tom got hit with a $500 fine for his garage sale. This is getting out of control. Several people responded with shocked emojis and comments about how unfair that seemed. A guy named Rick, who lived down the street, wrote, "We need to vote her out at the next election. This is supposed to be a neighborhood, not a prison." Tom didn't respond to the chat. He never posted much in there anyway. But it was validating to know he wasn't the only one who thought Linda was taking things too far. Thursday afternoon, Tom paid the fine online. $500 gone just like that. He could afford it, that wasn't the issue. It was the principle. He'd followed every rule he knew about, maintained his property, been a good neighbor, and this was how the HOA treated him. But fighting it seemed like more trouble than it was worth. He'd have to appeal to the board, probably the same board that Linda had convinced to put these crazy rules in place. He'd have to take time off work, attend meetings, make his case. For what? To maybe get the fine reduced? It wasn't worth the energy. So he paid it, sent the confirmation email to the HOA office, and figured that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Friday evening, Tom got home around 7. He'd had a long week and was looking forward to a quiet weekend. Maybe catch up on some shows, sleep in, do absolutely nothing productive. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed Linda standing on her front lawn, tablet in hand, staring at his house. She didn't even try to hide it. Just stood there watching him get out of his car. Tom ignored her and went inside. Through his living room window, he could see her still standing there, typing something on her tablet. What was she doing? Taking notes on what time he got home? This was crossing a line from annoying into straight-up harassment. Saturday morning, he decided to work from home, catching up on some paperwork he could do remotely. Around 11, there was a knock on his door. Tom answered it to find Linda standing on his porch, that same serious expression on her face. "Linda, what can I do for you?" "I need to discuss some concerns about your property," she said, not waiting for an invitation before launching into her speech. "I've noticed irregular activity here. Vehicles coming and going at odd hours. You're away from your residence for extended periods. I'm wondering if you're using this property for purposes that violate our residential zoning." Tom stared at her. "You're wondering if I'm what? Running a business? Or perhaps renting out rooms without board approval? We have strict rules about that. Linda, I live here alone. I'm not running a business or renting anything to anyone. I just have a job that requires travel sometimes." She didn't look convinced. "What kind of job requires that much travel? And why are there different vehicles here sometimes?" "That's really none of your business," Tom said, trying to keep his voice level. "My work is private. The vehicles belong to colleagues or friends. I'm not violating any HOA rules." "I'll be the judge of that," Linda said. "I'm conducting an investigation." "An investigation?" Tom couldn't help the disbelief in his voice. "Into what? Me having a normal life? Into potential violations of community bylaws." She held up her tablet like it was evidence. "I have documentation of unusual activity. If you're conducting any business operations from this residence without proper disclosure, there will be consequences." Tom felt his patience wearing thin. "I paid your fine for the garage sale. I've done nothing wrong. And frankly, watching my house and interrogating me about my personal life is bordering on harassment." Linda's expression hardened. "I'm the HOA president. It's my job to ensure compliance. If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem answering simple questions about your activities." "I have plenty to hide, Linda. It's called privacy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to do." He closed the door, not quite slamming it, but definitely not gently. Through the window, he watched her walk back to her house, still typing on her tablet. This was getting out of hand. Tom had dealt with difficult people before in his line of work, but this was different. This was his home, his sanctuary from all the stress of his job. And now he had an HOA president treating him like a suspect in some investigation she'd invented in her head. He pulled out his phone and texted his colleague Dave, someone who'd become a good friend over the years. "You ever dealt with a crazy HOA president?" Dave's response came back quickly. "Not personally, but I've heard stories. They can be nightmare." "What's going on?" Tom typed out a brief summary of the situation. Dave's next message made him smile despite his frustration. "Want me to have a talk with her? Pretty sure what she's doing crosses some legal lines." "Nah, I'll handle it," Tom replied. "Just needed to vent." "Thanks, though." He set his phone down and looked out the window again. Linda's house was quiet now, but he knew this wasn't over. She'd found a new target, and apparently she wasn't going to let it go until she'd satisfied whatever suspicion she'd built up in her mind. Tom had tried to be reasonable. He'd paid the fine, been polite, kept to himself. But if Linda wanted to keep pushing, she was going to find out that she'd picked the wrong person to harass. He just hoped it wouldn't come to that. The next 2 weeks felt like living under surveillance. Tom would leave for work and see Linda's curtains twitch. He'd come home late and her porch light would flicker on. It was like having a nosy neighbor crossed with a private investigator, except the investigator had way too much free time and a clipboard. Tuesday morning, Tom had an early meeting downtown. He left the house at 6 in the morning, dressed in a full suit and tie. By the time he got to his car, Linda was already outside, pretending to water plants that clearly didn't need watering in the dark. She watched him back out of his driveway with the kind of intensity usually reserved for people watching reality TV finales. Unreal, Tom muttered to himself as he drove away. Work had been demanding lately. He'd been assigned to a case that required long hours and careful attention to detail, the kind of work that followed him home mentally, even when he tried to leave it at the office. The last thing he needed was to come home and deal with HOA drama. Wednesday, he worked from home, video conferences all day. Around 3 in the afternoon, he happened to glance out his window and saw Linda standing at the end of his driveway, taking photos of his house, not even trying to be subtle about it. Just standing there with her phone, snapping pictures like she was documenting a crime scene. Tom opened his front door. "Linda, what are you doing?" She didn't even look embarrassed. "Documenting property conditions. It's part of my duties as HOA president." "Property conditions? My lawn is mowed, my house is painted, everything looks fine." "I'm being thorough," she said, still taking photos. "You never know what violations might exist." Tom closed the door harder than necessary. This was beyond ridiculous. He texted Rick from down the street. "Is Linda photographing other people's houses or just mine?" Rick responded almost immediately. "Just yours as far as I can tell. She's lost it, man. Thursday evening, Tom's colleague Dave stopped by to drop off some files Tom needed to review. Dave drove a black SUV, standard government-issue vehicle. Nothing fancy, just a reliable car that several agencies used. They sat in Tom's living room for about 20 minutes discussing work stuff over coffee, and then Dave left. 10 minutes later, Tom's phone rang. It was Linda. Yes, Tom answered, already knowing this wasn't going to be good. I noticed you had a visitor today, a government vehicle. I need to know the nature of that visit. Tom took a deep breath, counting to 5 before responding. Linda, that was a friend from work dropping something off. That's all. What kind of work requires government vehicles? The kind that's none of your business, Tom said, his patience officially gone. Linda, you need to stop. This harassment needs to end. It's not harassment, it's oversight. If you're conducting government business from a residential property, there may be zoning implications. I'm not conducting anything. A friend stopped by. Friends do that. Normal people have visitors. Linda's voice got that icy tone she used when she thought she was winning an argument. We'll see what the board has to say about this. I'm adding this to my report. She hung up before Tom could respond. That weekend, Tom had to fly out for work. He'd be gone for 5 days, a pretty standard trip for his job. He packed his bag Sunday night, set his lights on timers to make the house look occupied, and arranged for Betty to grab his mail. Standard procedure when he traveled. When he got back Friday afternoon, exhausted from the trip and ready to just decompress, there was another envelope from the HOA in his mailbox. This one was an invitation, or more like a summons, to the monthly HOA meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday. A handwritten note from Linda was paper-clipped to it. Your attendance is strongly encouraged to address concerns about your property. Tom crumpled the note and went inside. He knew what this was. Linda had been building her case, whatever ridiculous case that was, and now she was ready to present it to the board. Part of him wanted to just ignore it, but he knew that would only make things worse. If he didn't show up, she'd probably spin it as him being guilty of whatever she'd convinced herself he was doing. Tuesday evening came around. The HOA meetings were held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that usually hosted kids' birthday parties and weekend yoga classes. Tom showed up at 7, still in his work clothes because he hadn't had time to go home and change. The room was more crowded than usual. Apparently, word had gotten around that Linda was planning something big. Tom recognized most of the faces. Betty gave him an encouraging smile from her seat. Rick nodded at him. A few other neighbors he'd waved to over the years were scattered around the room. Linda sat at the front table with the other board members. There were 5 of them total, though Linda clearly ran the show. She had her tablet in front of her and a stack of printed papers that Tom assumed was her evidence. The meeting started with the usual boring stuff. Minutes from the last meeting, budget updates, a discussion about repainting the community center. Tom zoned out, checking his phone occasionally, waiting for the inevitable. Then Linda cleared her throat. Item 7 on the agenda. Concerns regarding suspicious activity at 847 Maple Drive. Tom's address. Here we go. Over the past 3 weeks, Linda began, standing up like she was presenting to a courtroom. I've documented concerning patterns of behavior at this residence. The homeowner keeps highly irregular hours, frequently leaving before dawn or returning late at night. There have been multiple vehicles at the property, including government-issued vehicles. The residence sits empty for days at a time, sometimes weeks. She clicked on her tablet and a projector screen lit up with photos. Photos of Tom's house at different times of day. Photos of him leaving for work. Photos of Dave's SUV in his driveway. It was like a stalker's scrapbook. I believe, Linda continued, that there may be unauthorized business activities, possible subletting, or other violations of our residential zoning. At minimum, I'm proposing we implement a new disclosure requirement. All residents should be required to inform the board of their occupations and any business activities. The room got quiet. Tom felt everyone's eyes shift to him. One of the other board members, a retired teacher named Greg, spoke up. Linda, this seems a bit excessive. Lots of people keep irregular hours. That doesn't mean they're doing anything wrong. It's suspicious, Linda insisted. And as president, it's my responsibility to investigate suspicious activity. Betty raised her hand. For the record, Tom has been a perfect neighbor for 10 years. His property is always maintained. He's quiet. He's respectful. I don't see what the problem is. The problem, Linda said, her voice getting sharp, is that we have rules. We have standards. And when someone displays this many red flags, we need to investigate. Tom had been sitting quietly, but now he felt compelled to speak. He stood up. Linda, can I ask you something? She looked surprised that he was even there, though she'd specifically asked him to attend. Go ahead. What exactly do you think I'm doing? Specifically, because you keep saying suspicious activity, but you haven't actually accused me of anything concrete. Linda faltered for just a second. Well, the irregular hours, the vehicles. I have a job that requires travel, Tom said calmly. Sometimes I work early, sometimes late. The vehicles belong to colleagues. I'm not running a business, I'm not subletting. I'm not violating any actual rules. You're investigating me for living my normal life. If you'd just disclose your occupation, this would be much simpler, Linda countered. Why should I have to? That's private information. Are you planning to make everyone in this neighborhood disclose their jobs? Betty, what do you do? Greg, what about you? Where does this end? Rick stood up from his seat. He's got a point. This is getting way too invasive. We all pay our HOA fees to maintain common areas and handle real problems, not to spy on each other. A few other people murmured in agreement. Linda's face was getting red. This is about maintaining community standards. If Tom has nothing to hide, there should be no issue with transparency. Everyone has things to hide, Linda. It's called privacy. Tom kept his voice steady. I've broken no rules except having a garage sale without your permission, which I paid for. Everything else you're describing is just me living in my own house. The meeting devolved into arguments after that. Some people sided with Linda, mostly the older residents who liked structure and rules. Others sided with Tom, tired of Linda's overreach. The board eventually tabled the discussion, saying they needed more time to consider any new disclosure policies. As people filed out, Betty caught up with Tom in the parking lot. That woman is obsessed with you, she said quietly. I don't know what her problem is, but this isn't normal. Tom knew she was right. This had gone beyond HOA business. Linda had fixated on him, convinced herself he was up to something, and now she wasn't going to let it go until she got answers. What worried him was how far she might go. He'd seen this kind of thing before in his work. People who convinced themselves they were right, who felt justified in crossing boundaries because they believed they were doing the right thing. He got in his car and sat there for a minute before starting the engine. He'd tried being polite, tried being reasonable, tried ignoring it. None of it had worked. Linda wanted to know what he did for a living. She wanted to investigate him. Fine, let her investigate. She might not like what she found. The week after the HOA meeting was quiet. Too quiet. Tom almost felt like the storm had passed. Linda hadn't shown up at his door, hadn't called, hadn't even been lurking around taking photos. For 3 whole days, things felt almost normal again. Then Thursday morning happened. Tom was in his home office going through case files on his laptop when his phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number with a local area code. He almost didn't answer, figuring it was spam, but something made him pick up. Hello? Is this Tom Bradley? A professional voice, male, official sounding. Yes, who's calling? This is James Chen from the County Zoning and Code Enforcement Office. We received a complaint about your property and I need to ask you some questions. Tom sat up straighter. Of course, Linda had done this. What kind of complaint? The complaint alleges you're running an unauthorized business from your residential property. Specifically, that you're operating some kind of rental service or commercial enterprise without proper permits. Tom closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Mr. Chen, I'm not running any business from my home. I live here. That's it. Who filed this complaint? I can't disclose that information, but I do need to verify a few things. Can you confirm your occupation? Here it was. The question Linda had been dying to get answered, and now she'd found a way to force it through official channels. Tom had to be careful here. His work sometimes required discretion, but he also couldn't lie to a county official. I work for the federal government, Tom said carefully. I'm a prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office. There was a pause on the other end. A federal prosecutor? Yes, I specialize in civil rights cases and fraud investigations. Sometimes my work involves HOA disputes, actually. Cases where housing associations violate fair housing laws or abuse their authority. Another pause, longer this time. I see. And you're not operating any business from your residence? None whatsoever. I have a home office where I occasionally review files, but that's standard for anyone who works remotely sometimes. No clients come to my house, no commercial transactions, nothing. Mr. Chen's voice changed, became more apologetic. Mr. Bradley, I'm very sorry to have bothered you. This complaint is clearly without merit. For what it's worth, the person who filed it included quite an extensive documentation package. Photos, timestamps, detailed logs. It's actually a bit concerning. Concerning how? Well, between you and me, this level of surveillance of a neighbor raises some flags. If you feel you're being harassed, you might want to document that. Tom almost laughed. Trust me, I've been documenting it. Thank you for calling, Mr. Chen. Again, my apologies. I'll be closing this complaint. Have a good day. Tom hung up and stared at his phone. Linda had actually done it. She'd filed an official complaint with the county, probably thinking they'd come investigate him, find something wrong, and vindicate all her suspicions. Instead, she'd basically just confirmed to a county official that she'd been stalking her neighbor. The funny thing was, if Linda had just left him alone after the garage sale fine, none of this would have escalated. Tom would have paid the money, forgotten about it, and moved on with his life. But she'd pushed, and now she'd crossed a line that was going to be very difficult to uncross. His phone buzzed with a text from Rick. Dude, Linda is at the community center printing something. Huge stack of papers. Betty saw her and said she looks like she's preparing for war. Tom texted back, let me know if you hear anything. He didn't have to wait long. An hour later, his doorbell rang. Tom opened it to find Linda standing there with a manila folder thick with papers. She looked triumphant. I need to speak with you, she announced. Linda, I'm working. Whatever this is, it can wait. No, it can't. She held up the folder. I've compiled a complete report of all your violations and suspicious activities. I'm presenting this to the full board tomorrow night, and I'm recommending they take legal action against you. Tom leaned against his door frame, arms crossed. Legal action for what exactly? For operating an unauthorized business, for violating residential zoning, for refusing to comply with disclosure requirements, and for general conduct unbecoming of a resident of Oakdale Heights. Linda, I just got off the phone with the county. They called me about your complaint. They're dismissing it because there's nothing to investigate. I'm not doing anything wrong. Her confident expression faltered just slightly. The county doesn't understand the full scope of what's happening here. And what is happening here, Linda? Really? Tell me what you think I'm doing. You're hiding something, she said, her voice getting heated. Normal people don't act the way you do. Normal people don't have government cars showing up. Normal people don't keep these kinds of hours. You're up to something, and I'm going to prove it. Tom felt his patience snap. Not loudly, not dramatically, but there was a clear line, and Linda had just stepped over it. You know what, Linda? You're right. I am hiding something. I keep my work private because I have to. Because I've prosecuted people who've made threats. Because I value my privacy and my safety, and you with your cameras and your documentation and your harassment are violating that privacy. I'm not harassing you, You are absolutely harassing me. You've been watching my house for weeks, taking photos, logging my schedule, calling county officials to investigate me. You filed a false report because you couldn't handle the fact that I wouldn't tell you my life story. Do you realize that what you're doing could actually be illegal? Linda's face went red. How dare you? I'm the HOA president. I have every right to ensure compliance. You have the right to enforce HOA bylaws. You don't have the right to stalk residents. You don't have the right to investigate my personal life. And you definitely don't have the right to file false complaints with government agencies. It wasn't false. You're clearly engaged in suspicious activity. Working irregular hours isn't suspicious, Linda. Having friends visit isn't suspicious. Living my life in my own house that I own isn't suspicious. The only suspicious thing happening in this neighborhood is you obsessing over me. She clutched her folder tighter. The board will hear about all of this. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I suggest you attend because we'll be voting on significant penalties. I'll be there, Tom said quietly. And Linda, I'd think very carefully about what you're doing, because you're about to make a very big mistake. She turned and marched back down his driveway, her folder tucked under her arm like a weapon. Tom closed the door and leaned against it. This had gotten completely out of hand. He'd wanted to keep his job private, to maintain that separation between his work life and home life, but Linda had made that impossible. She'd forced his hand. He picked up his phone and called Dave. Hey, what's up? Dave answered. Remember that HOA situation I told you about? The crazy president lady? Yeah, what about it? It's escalated. She filed a false complaint with the county, and now she's talking about the board taking legal action against me. I think it's time to stop being quiet about what I do." Dave was silent for a moment. "You sure? Once that cat's out of the bag, everyone's going to know." "I know, but she's not leaving me any choice. She's going to keep pushing until something breaks, and I'd rather control how this information comes out than have her dig it up herself." "Fair enough. What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet. Just wanted to give you a heads up. There's an HOA meeting tomorrow night. I think it's time Linda learned exactly who she's been harassing. Good luck with that. Let me know if you need backup." Tom hung up and spent the rest of the day thinking about what he'd say. He'd spent years keeping his work separate from his personal life, and in one evening he was going to shatter that separation completely. All because Linda couldn't mind her own business. That night he barely slept. He kept running through scenarios in his head, trying to figure out how the meeting would go. Part of him felt bad about what was going to happen. Not bad for himself, but bad because this was going to be humiliating for Linda. And despite everything, he didn't enjoy humiliating people. But she'd left him no choice. Friday evening, Tom got home from the office around 5. He had 2 hours before the meeting. He changed into clean jeans and a button-down shirt, something casual but put together. He made himself dinner but barely touched it. The neighborhood group chat had been buzzing all day with speculation about what Linda was planning to present. Betty had texted him privately, "Whatever happens tonight, we've got your back." Rick had sent, "Linda's been at the community center since 4 p.m. setting up. This is going to be something." At 6:45, Tom grabbed his keys and headed out. It was time to end this. The community center parking lot was packed. Apparently half the neighborhood had heard that drama was coming and didn't want to miss it. Tom recognized cars belonging to people he'd only waved at in passing. This was going to be quite an audience. He walked into the building and found the meeting room completely full. Every chair was taken and people were standing along the walls. Linda was at the front table with the other board members, and she'd set up her projector again. She looked confident, prepared, ready for battle. When she saw Tom walk in, she smiled. Not a friendly smile, a gotcha smile. Tom found a spot along the back wall, standing between Rick and a couple he recognized from down the street. Betty caught his eye from her seat and gave him an encouraging nod. The meeting started right at 7. Linda rushed through the standard agenda items, barely letting anyone speak. Everyone knew what they were really here for. Then she stood up, clicked her remote, and Tom's house appeared on the projector screen again. "Ladies and gentlemen," Linda began, "tonight we're going to address a serious issue that threatens the integrity of our community." Tom took a deep breath. Here we go. Linda's presentation was impressive. Tom had to give her that. She'd put together a slideshow that would make a detective proud. Photos of his house at different times, timestamps, notes about his schedule, images of different vehicles that had been in his driveway. She'd even made charts showing patterns of when he was home versus away. "As you can see," Linda said, clicking through her slides, "this pattern of behavior is highly irregular for a typical homeowner. Multiple unexplained absences, government vehicles, refusal to disclose occupation. All of this adds up to a clear violation of our community standards." Some people in the room were nodding along. Others looked uncomfortable with the level of detail in Linda's surveillance. Tom just stood quietly against the wall waiting. "Furthermore," Linda continued, "when I attempted to investigate these concerns through proper channels, Mr. Bradley became hostile and threatening. He's refused to cooperate with reasonable requests for information. I'm recommending that the board impose a monthly audit requirement on his property and a significant fine for non-compliance with disclosure policies." Greg, the retired teacher on the board, raised his hand. "Linda, I'm still not clear on what actual rule he's broken besides the garage sale, which he already paid for." "The pattern of behavior suggests commercial activity," Linda insisted. "We have a responsibility to investigate. But do we have actual evidence of commercial activity?" Greg pressed. "Or just suspicion?" Linda's jaw tightened. "Sometimes you have to read between the lines, Greg. Not everything is spelled out in black and white." Tom decided it was time. He raised his hand. Linda saw him and her expression became smug. "Yes, Mr. Bradley? Do you have something to say?" "I do, actually." Tom stepped forward from the wall. The room went quiet. I'd like to address these concerns directly if that's all right with the board. The board members looked at each other. Greg nodded. Go ahead. Tom walked to the front of the room, standing a few feet away from Linda. He could feel everyone's eyes on him. This was it. The secret he'd kept for 10 years was about to become neighborhood knowledge. First, I want to say I understand why some of you might have questions. Linda's right that I keep unusual hours and travel a lot. She's right that I've been private about my work. And I'm going to explain why. He took a breath. I'm a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office. I've worked there for 12 years. I handle civil rights cases, fraud investigations, and violations of federal housing law. The room stayed silent, but he could see people's expressions changing. Betty looked surprised but pleased. Rick's eyebrows went up. Linda's confident smile started to fade. The reason I keep irregular hours is because federal cases don't follow a 9-to-5 schedule. I travel because I handle cases in multiple districts. The government vehicles Linda photographed belong to colleagues who sometimes give me rides or drop off files. That's it. There's no business, no commercial activity, no subletting, just a job that requires flexibility and discretion. Linda found her voice. That still doesn't explain why you refused to disclose this information when asked. Tom turned to face her directly. Linda, I've prosecuted some dangerous people. Fraudsters who've threatened witnesses. People who've made it clear they hold grudges. I keep my home address as private as possible for safety reasons. It's not in any public directories. I don't advertise where I live. And I certainly don't share my career details with people who don't need to know. He paused, then continued. But there's another reason I'm bringing this up now. Part of my caseload for the past few years has been HOA cases. Linda's face went pale. I handle cases where homeowners associations violate fair housing laws, where board members abuse their authority, where residents are harassed or discriminated against. I'm actually familiar with a lot of the tactics used in HOA overreach cases. The room was dead silent now. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Tom kept his voice calm and even. Selective enforcement of rules, excessive surveillance of residents, using HOA authority to conduct investigations into people's private lives, filing false complaints with government agencies. These are all things that come up in the cases I prosecute. Linda started to speak, but Tom held up a hand. Let me be clear. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm not planning to take legal action. I'm simply explaining why your investigation into my private life crossed several lines that, in other contexts, would raise serious legal concerns. Greg was staring at Linda now, and he didn't look happy. Linda, you filed a complaint with the county? I had legitimate concerns, Linda said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. About a federal prosecutor living in the neighborhood? That's your legitimate concern? Greg shook his head. Do you realize how this looks? Another board member, a woman named Patricia, spoke up. Linda, how long have you been watching his house? I was documenting violations. How long? Patricia repeated. Linda didn't answer. Tom decided to help her out. About 3 weeks of active surveillance. Photos, notes, logging my schedule. The county official I spoke with actually said it was concerning how detailed her documentation was. The room erupted in whispers. Tom could hear fragments of conversations. That's crazy. I told you she was taking this too far. Poor guy just wanted to live in peace. Linda looked around at the board, at the audience, and seemed to realize that this wasn't going the way she'd planned. I was just trying to protect the community. From what? Betty called out from her seat. From someone who owns their home, pays their fees, and keeps to himself? Tom's been a better neighbor than most of us for 10 years. Rick chimed in. Yeah, and meanwhile, you're literally stalking the guy. That's protecting the community? Linda gathered her papers, her hands shaking slightly. This is ridiculous. I followed proper procedure. I enforced the rules. You went way beyond enforcing rules, Greg said firmly. This board is supposed to maintain common areas and handle reasonable disputes. Not investigate residents like they're criminals. I think we need to have a serious discussion about boundaries and what appropriate enforcement looks like. Patricia nodded. I agree. And Linda, I think you need to consider whether this position is still a good fit for you. Linda's face went red. Are you asking me to resign? I'm saying that what you've done here isn't what this board is supposed to be about. You've spent weeks obsessing over one resident who, as it turns out, is a federal prosecutor who literally handles cases about HOA abuse. Do you see the problem? Linda looked around the room one more time. No one was meeting her eyes except to look disappointed or angry. She grabbed her tablet and her folder. Fine, you want my resignation? You have it. Effective immediately. She stormed out of the meeting room and the door slammed behind her. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Greg sighed and looked at Tom. Mr. Bradley, on behalf of the board, I apologize. This should never have happened. Tom nodded. I appreciate that. Look, I didn't want any of this. I just wanted to sell some old stuff and live my life. I'm not mad at the board or the HOA in general. But yeah, this got way out of hand. It did, Patricia agreed. We'll be reviewing our policies to make sure this kind of overreach doesn't happen again. And that garage sale rule? I'm proposing we get rid of it. It's ridiculous. Several people in the audience clapped at that. The meeting wrapped up shortly after. People came up to Tom to apologize, to say they'd suspected Linda was going too far, to welcome him properly to the neighborhood even though he'd lived there for a decade. It was awkward and touching at the same time. Betty gave him a hug. Your secret's safe with me, dear. Well, safe with everyone now, but you know what I mean. Tom smiled. Thanks, Betty. Rick shook his hand. Man, that was intense. But also kind of awesome. Linda's face when you said you prosecute HOA cases was priceless. I didn't want to embarrass her, Tom said honestly, but she didn't leave me much choice. Walking back to his house that night, Tom felt lighter than he had in weeks. Yeah, his privacy was gone, and yeah, everyone in the neighborhood now knew what he did for a living. But the harassment was over. Linda was gone from the board. And maybe, just maybe, he could finally relax in his own home. A few weeks later, Patricia was elected the new HOA president. Her first official act was repealing the garage sale rule and 3 other bylaws that everyone agreed were too restrictive. The neighborhood felt different, more relaxed somehow. Tom ran into Linda once at the grocery store. She saw him, turned around, and went down a different aisle. He didn't chase after her. There was nothing left to say. One Saturday morning, a month after everything had settled down, Tom held another garage sale. This time, he'd submitted the paperwork, though Patricia had told him it wasn't necessary anymore. Better safe than sorry, he figured. Betty bought a lamp. Rick got some old sports equipment. Even some of Tom's newer neighbors stopped by, the ones who'd heard the story and wanted to meet the guy who'd taken down the HOA president just by explaining his job. Tom made about $400 and finally got his garage cleaned out. No drama, no violations, no surveillance. Just a regular Saturday morning in the neighborhood. Exactly what he'd wanted all along.